the legendary Prince Avaris, who came from the ancient alien city of Hyperborea. But before I start with this, I wanted to inform you that Alexander the Great supposedly had an Atlantean technology, or quote unquote extraterrestrial technology, super weapon that was something like what we would call the lightning rod of Zeus. And he had gone with his 30,000 soldiers, his warriors, into the Mongolian Taklamakan desert, and he lost a third of them. He lost 10,000 of them going in there. And he wanted to go in there because he was supposed to meet up with someone from Hyperborea, an Atlantean, who was supposed to give him this super weapon. So for him to go into the Taklamakan desert, which means actually you go in but you can never get out, to lose a third of his warriors, it must have been very important for him. So what was this technology? Who were these people? And who was this priest Avaris? It said that Avaris did not take any food from the earth, and that he flew through the air on his arrow, what we would call, well, saita in Greek means a craft, the gift of the god Apollo, cured diseases through chants, and freed the world from a plague. They say there was a plague all over the world, and Apollo ordered the Greeks and barbarians who had come to consult his oracle that the Atlanteans should pray on behalf of all, and many races sent embassies to them. They say that Avaris arrived as ambassador of the Hyperboreans in the 53rd Olympiad. That's about 568 to 565 BC. Now, a large group of legendary mystics appeared in late archaic Greece and early classical Greece. Avaris is easily the most colorful because of the strange stories about him, yet not many people have heard of him. But we do have ancient Greek writers that do mention this. The constellation of Sagitta is the arrow of an archer. It's said that it belongs to Apollo. Saita, meaning basically craft. Saita means arrow. Okay, you can imagine how fast it goes. So with it, Apollo slew the Cyclops, the creators of Zeus, the thunderbolt. He killed them for Asclepius. He then hid it in Hyperborea, which is where he has a winged temple, and it was huge. Heraclitus of Pontus also says in his work on justice that a certain Avaris was riding on it. Later, Apollo turned it into a constellation in memory of his battle. This is according to Eratosthenes, Catasterisms 29. Now, Avaris rode on the arrow, and in this way crossed impassable places, such as rivers, lakes, marshes, mountains, etc. And the story goes he recited that the arrow carried out purifications and chased away plagues and storms from the cities that considered it opportune to help him. This is from Iamblichus' Pythagorean Life 91. As Herodotus says, this Avaris came from Hyperboreans. They are to the north and inland of the Scythians. This Avaris was divinely inspired and ran across Greece with an arrow and gave various oracles and prophecies. The orator Lycurgus says that in his Contra Menesacmo that there was a plague among the Hyperboreans, and Avaris went to work with Apollo. Avaris learned oracles from him, took Apollo's arrow as a sign, and went through Greece prophesying. This is from Gloss on Gregory of Nazianzus. Now, between myth and reality, Avaris is a character that is supposed to be fictional. However, he is credited with the authorship of several real books. La Suda, a Byzantine encyclopedia, lists 5 titles: Scythian Oracles, Marriage of the River Hebrus, Purifications, Theogony, The Arrival of Apollo to Hyperborea. The idea of real text with an unreal author seems strange. However, these kinds of things are everywhere in archaic Greece. Take Orpheus, for example. Orpheus was the son of Apollo and one of the Muses, Calliope. He visited the underworld. He was one of the Argonauts, and his songs could enchant all living creatures and even rocks and rivers. And still we have fragments of poems attributed to him, some dating back to the 6th century BC. Then there is Linus, who competed with a musical contest against Apollo, or Epimenides, a prophet who supposedly slept for half a century, or Musaeus, Olympus, or Terpander. Everyone is torn between history and myth, but we have fragments of his poetry. The same trend can even be seen with some important poets whose work survives in much better condition. They were detailed, completely fictional, biographical traditions about Homer and Hesiod, Sappho and Solon, and others. Now some of these poets were surely historical figures, in a sense at least, but the stories about their lives are almost pure legend, but those legends also appear in surviving poetry. Homer's blindness, Hesiod's encounters with the Muses and Homer, Sappho's love story with Phaon, etc., all stories that scream fictional embellishment, but they are also there in the poems. That should provide a clue as to how to interpret what we're told about Avaris. The texts were real, but it is a text that created the character's backstory. And like Orpheus and Solon, the texts existed at an early date. The quotes at the top for Iamblichus and Gregory Nazianzus come from centuries later, but there are older stories that just aren't that detailed. A lost poem by Pindar mentions Avaris in some connection with Croesus. Herodotus mentions Abaris as a footnote to his Hyperborean account, but dismisses the story as pure rubbish. Herodotus in Historians says, "And that is the end of my story of Hyperborea, because I'm not reporting the story of Avaris, who is said to be Hyperborean. I'll just mention that he carried his arrow around the world without eating." And Plato mentions Avaris in passing, along with Zalmoxis, the main divinity of the Thracian people of the Getas, as two northern mystics known for their magical spells. Our sources also disagree on when Avaris was supposed to have been present. Two of them place the arrival of Avaris in Greece in 560 BC, one in the time of King Croesus of Lydia. It dates from 547 to 6 BC, 547 to 546 BC, another in the 730s BC, taking classes with Pythagoras in Italy on his way home to Hyperborea. Hyperborea, according to Pindar, owed Pixia X, but neither on foot nor by sea could you discover the fabulous path to the gathering of the Hyperboreans. Apollo always takes particular delight in their feasts and worship, and laughs at the conceited arrogance of the beasts, nor is the muse alien to her customs. Everywhere the maidens turn and dance to the sound of the sonorous lyre and the little guitar, and the strident voice of the flutes. And their merry parties, they tie golden laurel in their hair. Sickness has no place among these holy people, nor ruinous old age, but they live without effort or battle, avoiding the severe judgment of Nemesis. This image seems fictitious, and it is probably based on another obscure mystic, Aristeas de Proconnesos, but the Greeks of the 5th to 4th centuries BC adopted Hyperborea as a name for a royal place. The name literally means beyond the north wind. Most of our sources use the name to refer to the region north of Scythia or southern Ukraine that was familiar to Greek settlers in the Black Sea. If the name was used by people who actually went that far north, they would presumably have thought that Hyperborea extended to Belarus and western Russia. Later, writers sometimes treat Hyperborea and Scythia the same. Others identify Hyperborea with the land of the Cimmerians. For his part, Eratosthenes, that colossus of ancient geography, identified Hyperborea with the island of Thule, The only source of information from the Greeks about Thule was Pytheas of Massalia, who visited the island sometime in the 4th century BC. Eratosthenes devised a north-south meridian running from Aswan to Alexandria, then Rhodes and the city near Byzantium, then Oblia, the Greek colony in southern Ukraine, Olbia, and finally Thule. This has led some commentators to attempt to place Thule in the Baltic. But it seems more likely that the Thule of Pytheas was farther west, perhaps one of the island groups north of Scotland, the Shetland or the Faroe Islands. And it seemed particular Ptolemy's misdeformed idea of the geography of Scotland and its relationship with Thule, conceived as a small island. The texts: we have no substantial evidence on the literary output of Avaris. What little there is can be found in just 2 modern editions, Kenkel's edition of epic fragments. Unfortunately, there is very little hope of recovering any Greek texts lost before the Hellenistic period. The books that appear in places like the library of Lucio Calpurnio in Herculano will almost inevitably be contemporaries of or of important figures like Aristotle. The only minor pre-Hellenic work that has been discovered in relatively intact ancient copy is the Derveni papyrus, and it was a tremendous fluke. The only real idea we have of the context of Avaris's work is the backstory itself. The problem is that from approximately 300 BC onwards, we see that it's contaminated by stories about other mystics, for example, the link with Zalmoxis that we find in Plato and with Pythagoras and later authors like Iamblichus. Determining which is not always easy, but the link to Aristeas at least seems to have its origin in Avaris himself. Dowden suggests that the idea of Hyperborean origins was based on Aristeas' account of Hyperborea. Arguably, the most likely candidates for authentic backstory elements are Apollo hides his arrow in Hyperborea in a winged temple, Apollo sends out a world plague, and Athens invests ambassadors and makes prayers on behalf of the world at the Proerosia festival. Avaris wears Scythian clothes but shows good character. Avaris offers oracles that predict earthquakes, plagues, and astronomical events. Avaris drives away a plague from Sparta forever. Avaris flies through rivers and swamps with Apollo's arrows. A passage from Philodemus on piety says that according to Avaris, Cronos and Rhea were the fathers of the gods. In contrast to other poets such as Homer and Pindar, a fragmentary papyrus dealing with literature mentions Avaris in connection with the names of ethnic groups far to the north. On the other hand, the entry for Suda, already mentioned in the beginning of the article, ends with a strange linguistic description of its name, and translated to Greek it says the name declines Avaris, Abaridos, accusative plural Abaridas, and giving Avaris for Apocopa. Abaridos is the standard way of indicating how a Greek noun can change its form. Apocopa means to omit syllable, and why is Suda giving plural forms? Why would anyone write about Abarises? The idea of a poem that talks about Abarises are a rarity. Keep in mind that Abaris's backstory must have been an important component of his works. We can speculate that he might have said something like, Apollo has sent many Abarises down through the ages, or Sparta will need no more Abarises in the future, and so on. And although this is just speculation, it's very difficult to imagine any other reason to be speaking of Abarises in the plural, much less to use a form of the name that is clearly designed to be used in a poem. A Druid? Some writers on the Druids have suggested that Abaris was identical to Abras, who, according to ancient Irish legendary history, traveled from Ireland to distant countries, and after a long time returned to Scotland, where he stayed for 7 years, bringing a new system of religion, probably based on Pythagoreanism. Now, let's remember Scotland comes with the Greek word skota, meaning Skotadi meaning darkness. Now, some 18th century, it could be that Scotland was Hyperborea. Now, some 18th century writers have also identified Abaris with Bladud, a mythical king of the British, who supposedly practiced the arts of divination and magic, although there is little evidence to support the connection to Avaris or even the historical existence of Bladud. And there's an enigma. Beyond all this, and in the blurred line between myth and reality, very blurred the more remote the time, and it's worth wondering if Avaris really existed as such, or if he was a mixture or archetype of several characters, perhaps shamans or priests from a distant northern land. The truth is that, like a medieval witch or on her broom, she seems to be transported on an arrow of a god. And this is from Infinity Explorers by Anshri Vastava. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Please support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.